Hello, friends. Hello. Welcome, everyone. How are you doing this evening? Welcome to Leadership Impact Night. Excuse me. I'm Pastor Benjamin Wilson. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome, welcome. This is where we challenge mindsets, break barriers, and step boldly into leadership right where we are. Every week at 7 o'clock on Thursdays, we're diving into real, practical, and powerful leadership principles that will shift the way you think, equip you to lead, and multiply your impact. Last week, we talked about the mindset shift that unlocks leadership because we know, and we know this to be true, your leadership starts in your mind before it ever shows up in your life. But friends, tonight we're taking it one step further because there is a question that we need to answer, and we're going to answer that question tonight. The question, or not just one question, several. The first is this: what happens when you make that mindset shift but you still feel stuck? And the second one is what happens when you're ready to lead but it often feels like you're not in the right place yet. I need you to hear me clearly tonight. You don't need a new position to start leading. You need a new perspective on the influence that you already have. A new perspective, not a new position. Some of you have been waiting for influence, but what if I told you that you already have it? You already have influence. Like, excuse me, you have influence in your family. You have influence in your workplace. You even have influence in your community. But influence isn't what you have. Influence is what you do with it. So tonight we're going to once again break the cycle of waiting. We're going to be shifting from passively hoping for influence to actively owning it. Because if you don't steward influence, the influence you have now, you will not be ready for the influence that you want later. I told you last week, friends, that this session would change the way you see leadership forever. And I intend to make good on that. This is Leadership Impact Night. Our topic tonight is this. The topic for tonight is owning your influence, leading right where you are. I've never been one person. I've never been the type of person that was always asking when is it going to be my turn. I was content leading from the background, serving from the background, and even leading from the background, serving. Even when people would tell me, Ben, not Pastor Ben, but Ben, your time to step forward is coming. You can't stay in the background forever. I would nod, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm good right where I am. I don't need that position. Some people struggle with wanting to be seen. That wasn't me. It's not me. I'm still not that person. I was just fine then, and I'm just fine now not being seen. I wasn't chasing influence. I wasn't trying to position myself for leadership. I just wanted to serve. And that's where I am even today. But then God shook me with something. It was the realization that serving is not the same as stewarding. Serving is not the same as stewarding. I had to ask myself, am I really being faithful with what God has placed in my hands, or am I avoiding responsibility by trying to stay in the background? I spoke with someone shortly after that, at this point, many years ago, that mentioned someone that they have been working with, someone they have been coaching, and for this session, I want to give that person on the receiving end of the coaching the name Chris. Because I want to bring out this point in their story. Chris was talented, respected, faithful in everything that he did. But no matter how many people told him that he was a leader, he never embraced it, not fully at least. He'd say, "Nah, I'm not a leader like that. I just do my thing and I try to help where I can." How many of you have been like that? Chris wasn't. Well, he was doing a great job, without question. He was owning. He was doing what he needed to do, but he wasn't owning his influence. He thought because he wasn't on a stage or in a high level position, his leadership didn't matter much. It wasn't even considered leadership. As I was speaking with this individual, I mentioned the possibility of asking about Chris's perspective. And for us approaching it tonight, I want to look at it this way. If God has given you influence, but you are refusing to step into it, isn't that the same of burying what he gave you? In Matthew 25, Jesus, in speaking, he talks about the parable of the talents. He tells a story about a master who gave three servants a measure of money that was called talents. Before the master went on a journey, one servant, he gave 5 talents, and that servant doubled it. Another servant, he gave 2 talents, and that servant doubled it. The third servant, he gave 1 talent, and that servant buried it. He buried what he had. And when the master returned, he rewarded the first two, saying, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over little, so I'm going to give you much. I will set you over much." But to the third servant, the one who did nothing with what he had been given, the one who buried it, the master looked at him and said, "You wicked and lazy servant, take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10." Wow. For me, this parable hit home. Hit home from the sense of it helped me to recognize that when we refuse the influence that God has given us in the space we're currently in, we're burying what it is that he gave us. Because in that space, you have influence, but you aren't stewarding it. And some of you watching, someone watching, you know someone who is doing that very same thing, waiting for a bigger platform before they they begin to step into what it is that they need to be doing. Waiting for a leadership position, but not leading in the spaces that they already occupy. Asking God for more, but not stewarding what he has already given. And listen, I'm not here to judge. I'm here part of that wake-up call. Call this the moment where the alarm clock is going off. Don't hit snooze. What if your next level isn't waiting on God to give you more? What if it's waiting on you to use what you already have? That realization will change everything for you. It's time to stop waiting for a title and start owning your influence. Because if you don't lead where you are, you won't be ready to lead where you're going. So I want to break this down. What does it really mean to lead right where you are? Let's get this thing straight first. Influence has never been about a title. Not one person in history has received a title and automatically been made a leader. No leadership title no title gave someone the ability to be a leader. Now, it might have put them in a leadership position, but this isn't what made them a leader. A few weeks back, in one of our previous sessions, I shared a quote that is often attributed to John Maxwell, and that was, "Leadership is influence." Leadership is not a position. Leadership is not a title. Leadership is influence. And friends, I want you to get this. Titles don't create influence. What creates influence? Character. We've all seen people with high positions but low influence. We all know that manager who holds authority but they lack respect. That politician who has power but you can't trust them. Unfortunately, we know pastors and church leaders that have titles but don't really have impact. And on the other hand, we all know that one person that they don't have a title, but they held massive influence. The coworker that everyone goes to for advice. That one friend of yours that always seems to have the right words at the right time, or even that quiet leader, the one in the background working diligently. They're quiet, but they move with integrity and strength. Positions are given, titles are granted, but influence is earned. And what have you been waiting for a position to determine your influence? A lot of people have been waiting for that. A lot of people have been thinking that if they get into that position, they'll be able to lead with influence, and they're looking at leadership the wrong way. All we have to do is look at Joseph. If there was ever a person in the history of mankind that felt that their positioning was what disqualified them from influence, it was Joseph. He was constantly in situations where leadership was the last thing anyone expected from him. As a young man, he was sold into slavery by his brothers. As a slave, he had no rights, no position, no status. He was accused falsely and imprisoned, forgotten and seemingly without a future. If leadership were about titles, Joseph would have had every single excuse to say that he was not a leader. If influence was about titles, he could have said his influence was done. But here's where Joseph is different. He didn't wait for position to lead. Wherever he was placed, he showed up with faithfulness, excellence, and integrity. And because of that, God placed him in leadership, not because of a title, but because of his character. His character created influence long before he ever held a position. When Joseph was a slave in Potiphar's house, he could have complained, he could have resisted, he could have pushed back, he could have accepted mediocrity, did the bare minimum, but instead he worked with excellence. He handled responsibilities with integrity. He carried himself like a leader even when no one was watching. What happened? Potiphar saw the favor of God all on him and put him in charge of the entire house. Now that led to Joseph being recognized by everyone in the house as a person of influence, including Potiphar's wife. That led to Joseph being falsely accused and thrown into prison. At that point, most of us would have been like, that's it, I'm done. My leadership is over. Influence, bye bye. I don't want you. Get out of here. But not Joseph. Even in a prison cell, he didn't let his circumstances dictate his leadership. He served faithfully. He remained trustworthy. He treated others with care. The other prisoners, he treated them with wisdom and with care. And before long, he was placed in charge of the entire prison. Everywhere Joseph was placed, his influence followed. Let me say that again. Everywhere Joseph was placed, his influence followed. Not because of position, but because of his character. And when the moment came for him to stand before Pharaoh, he didn't have to force his way into leadership. His influence had already positioned him for it. Pharaoh didn't give him a title and say, now you can be a leader. No, Pharaoh recognized leadership that was already in him. He recognized it and promoted him because of it. And because Joseph had proven himself faithful in every season, he was given a position that allowed his influence to move from just within the house, within the palace, to the entire nation. Joseph's position was the result of his influence. His influence was never the result of his position. Joseph's story isn't just history. It's a principle of leadership that applies to every last one of us today. Because how we show up in our daily life determines the level of influence that we carry. At your job, your work ethic and attitude shape your influence. You might not have a leadership title yet. You might just be someone that sits at their desk and works below the radar. But that determines how you're viewed as a leader. If you cut corners, show up late, or just do the bare minimum, you blend in with the crowd. But if you show up consistently, work with integrity, and bring solutions instead of complaints, you'll be one of the people that people turn to, even before you're given a title. Influence is built through consistency. Influence is not built on position. Influence in your family, your character sets the standard. Leadership isn't just for the workplace. Leadership and influence starts at home. If you recognize, if people recognize how you respond under pressure, even when that's at home, how do you handle conflict? Because how you handle conflict shows whether you are a person of peace or a person of division. How you treat people when no one is watching reveals whether you are living with integrity or putting on a show. Friends, these are the things that your family watches. Joseph's leadership was proven in private before it was revealed in public. And for you, your influence starts in how you show up when no one is praising you, when no one is watching you, when no one is applauding you. In your community, your commitment builds trust. You don't need a microphone or a leadership role in the community or even in your church to be influential. If you serve with excellence and consistency, people are going to take notice. If you show up every week committed, show up every week trying to help others, your influence will grow. If you lead through your actions and not just your words, people will trust you. Why? Because they see the fruit of your leadership. They see the fruit of your influence. Joseph didn't start with a title. He started with faithfulness. And because of his faithfulness, God positioned him where his influence could reach farther. Your position does not determine your influence. Your consistency does. And this brings us to the next principle. Leadership is about stewardship, not status. This one right here, I love it. This one right here is what is the difference between people who stay stuck and people who walk in their calling, step into their calling boldly. They own it because too many people think leadership is about status. The thought is if I get a higher position, then I'll take leadership seriously. If I get more recognition, I'll show up differently. I'll do things better because I'm being recognized for it. I'm being appreciated. If I get promoted, then I'll show responsibility. Then I'll show my commitment. I've been working too hard and they don't know. It's not about that. Influence is not earned based on status. Influence is earned based on stewardship. Matthew 25, the parable of the talents. I mentioned it earlier. Jesus makes that clear because this story is not just, Jesus used it to illustrate a powerful truth about stewardship. But I want to take it a bit deeper. Just a few moments. I promise I'm not going to preach to you. I want us to get this leadership principle because this parable isn't just about what happened to those three servants. It's about what's happening in your life right now. Let me ask you, what are you doing with what God has placed in your hands? That's how I want to start this portion off. What are you doing with with what God has already placed in your hands? One of the biggest traps in leadership is comparison. I don't have as much as they do, so what I have must not be valuable. I don't have that many opportunities. If I had more opportunities, I'll be able to do more. I'm just working with this little bit, so what I'm doing doesn't really matter. Friends, in the parable of the talents, I want us to catch this. The master never asks who had the most. He asked them one thing. What did you do with what I gave you? The first two servants they weren't given the same amount, but they multiplied what they had. The third servant is the one that let fear, insecurity, and a small mindset convince him that what he had wasn't enough to work with. And in response to that thinking, he buried it. And when the master came back, he didn't say, why didn't you do as much as they did? No, he said, why didn't you do anything? He wasn't trying to compare them. He was holding him accountable. And some of us, we've been burying what God has placed in our hands. There's someone watching right now where you've been waiting for a bigger platform before you speak. You've been waiting for a title before you lead. You've been waiting for permission before you take action. God is not asking, do you have enough? He's asking, will you be faithful with what I've already given you? Family, what I'm doing right now with you, I'm just simply trying to be faithful with what God has given me. If he's given me something to share, I'm going to share it no matter how many people are watching. I need to say this loud and clear. Leadership isn't about what you have. It's about what you do with what you have. Some people think stewardship is only about money or resources. Here's the reality. It's about how you handle every single thing that God has entrusted to you. Your time. How are you using it? Your skills. Are you sharpening them or are you letting them fade? Your relationships. Are you cultivating them or are you neglecting them? And then there's the responsibilities. The opportunities that you've been presented. Are you stepping into them or are you making excuses? Stewardship is the foundation of leadership, and leadership is influence. Look at every great leader in scripture. Before they were ever given a title, before they were ever positioned, they were proven. Moses had to learn to lead sheep before he could lead people. We hear this about David all the time. He had to be faithful in the pasture before he could ever be trusted in the palace. And Nehemiah was a cupbearer before he was a city builder. God doesn't place people in leadership positions randomly. Friends, he places stewards in leadership. Stewards. Why? Because he knows that the ones who are faithful with the small things are the ones who will be faithful with the greater things. If you want to know why some people rise in leadership and others stay stuck, it comes down to one thing. Many times it comes to this one thing. It comes down to this: stewardship. I want to break this down just a bit more. How you treat people, how you treat small responsibilities determines your readiness for the greater ones. People love big opportunities, but they often despise the small assignment. Everyone loves being on stage, but not everyone wants to be the person picking up the chairs after the service. Everyone wants to run the meeting, but not everyone is ready to prepare the notes, take the minutes, and be in charge of the logistics. Everyone wants to be in charge, but not everyone wants to handle the details that nobody else notices. Friends, if you're waiting for bigger responsibilities before you start showing up with excellence, here's what you're doing. You're proving you're not ready for more, that you're not ready for leadership. The next level of excellence you bring to what you have determines what comes next. Too many people phone it in. They dumb it down when they think what they're doing is not important enough. This job isn't my dream job, so I'm just going to do the bare minimum. No one even really sees what I do. It doesn't even matter if I show up, so I'll just continue doing whatever I want to do when I want to do it. Then there are those people who say, once I get a bigger opportunity, then I'll show my best effort. But let me ask you this. Why would someone give you more when you're treating what you have like it doesn't matter? Joseph, again, could have treated slavery in prison like they were holding zones, but that's not what Joseph did. Joseph led with excellence in every single season. And because of that, God positioned him for something greater. Influence isn't something you wait for. Influence is something you grow. This is where a lot of people miss it. They think leadership. They think leadership is something that happens to them. One day, I'll be a leader. And then they follow that up with, or the other thought is, one day I'll have influence. One day people will look at me for wisdom and guidance. Friends, leadership is not about waiting for one day. Leadership is about growing. You grow your leadership by showing up with integrity. You grow your leadership by being faithful with the small things. You grow your leadership by stewarding what's already in your hands right now. And check this out. If you're not stewarding what you have right now, you're not ready for what God wants to give you. This brings me to the third principle. Influence multiplies when you use it. Let that sink in. Influence multiplies when you lose it. I'm sorry, when you use it. Not when you lose it, when you use it. This principle is a game changer. So many people have been waiting for more before they move. But influence doesn't wait. Influence doesn't wait for more. Influence doesn't grow by sitting still. Influence multiplies when it doesn't just add, it doesn't increase, it multiplies when you use it. Think about it. A seed doesn't multiply by staying in the bag. A talent doesn't grow when it's buried. And leadership does not expand by waiting. Leadership expands by action. If you want greater influence, you have to start using what you already have. Y'all, I speak about this man all the time. One of my favorite men in the Bible, David. Before he wore a crown, before he was ever sitting on the throne, he was leading. When he was just a shepherd, he led faithfully in the field. When he was an errand boy, he walked in confidence. And when the time came for him to face Goliath, David didn't hesitate. David didn't wait for influence to be handed to him. He walked in it where he stood. When Samuel came looking for the next king of Israel, y'all, David wasn't just not in the lineup. David wasn't in the same place. His own father didn't think enough to have him inside with the rest of his brothers. Some of you feel right now that you've been overlooked because your current season doesn't look like leadership. You feel like your work isn't significant enough. You feel like your role isn't visible enough. You might even be feeling like your impact isn't big enough. But look at David. David didn't wait for a better position before he showed up with excellence. He led in the field before he ever led in the kingdom. And because he was faithful with what was in his hands, because he was faithful with what was in his hands, God trusted him with what was ahead. David also led with confidence before he had a title. When David showed up on the battlefield and saw Goliath, he wasn't a king yet. David wasn't even a general. He wasn't a great warrior. He wasn't a soldier. David was just delivering lunch to his brothers. He was his father's DoorDash. He was his father's Uber Eats. And when Goliath started taunting Israel, Didn't need a title to act like a leader, because leadership isn't about what you're called. It's about how you carry yourself. David had no official authority, no title, no position, no armor, nothing. But what he did have was greater. He had faith, he had boldness, and he had the courage to step up when everybody else was falling back. If you wait for a title before you start leading, you'll never be ready when the moment comes. David's influence expanded because he took action, not because he waited, because he took action. The reason we talk about David today isn't because he was the strongest. It was because he was willing to step forward when everybody else hesitated. When he stood before a Goliath, he didn't wait for someone to confirm his leadership. He didn't wait for Saul to hand him a title. He stepped into his influence because he knew who he was. Some of you have been standing in front of your Goliath waiting for permission. You're waiting for someone to recognize your potential. I need to calm down because I'm getting a little too pastoral and wanting to preach. Waiting for an opportunity to be given to you. Waiting for fear to go away before you move. But listen, leaders don't wait for influence. Leaders don't wait for influence. They walk in it. If you're waiting for someone to tell you you're a leader, you're missing it. Because leadership isn't granted. Leadership is demonstrated. If you want greater influence, start using what you have, not tomorrow, not next week, right now. I want to share with you 3 quick ways to stop waiting and start influencing. Number 1, speak life into the people. Speak life into people right now. Leadership is about lifting others up. Instead of waiting for someone to recognize you, start recognizing others. Start recognizing others. Instead of hoping someone sees potential in you, start calling out the potential in others. The words you speak either build influence or destroy it. And if you want to multiply your impact, start by being intentional with your words. Number 2, show up with integrity. Your influence is only as strong as your character. If you cut corners, guess what? People see it. If you lack follow through, people remember that. If you compromise in small things, people will question your leadership in big things. David's influence grew because he led with integrity before anyone was watching. Your daily decisions shape the level of trust and influence that you carry. That was number 2. And here's number 3. Take ownership of the spaces you're in. Take ownership of the spaces that you're in. If you're waiting for a position before you take ownership, you're thinking about leadership the wrong way. Take ownership of your personal growth. Take ownership of the people God has already placed around you. Take ownership of your calling even before anyone else sees it. Influence isn't something you wait for. It's something you grow. After all that, after everything that I've shared to this point, I want us now to get into the meat of what this has all pointed to, of what is all kind of boiled down to. Activating your leadership and influence right where you are. Friends, we've talked about what influence is. We've talked about how leadership isn't about a title, but about how it's about stewardship. We've even talked about how influence multiplies when you use it. But now, it's time to activate it. It's time to activate it. Leadership isn't just something you learn about. It's something that you step into. And you've heard me say that often. It's something you step into. It's something that you own. And right now, I'm going to give you 3 very simple but powerful steps that will move you from thinking about from thinking about leadership to walking in it. Number 1, own your space. What does that mean? It means you take full responsibility for the influence that you already have. You take full responsibility for the influence you already have. Recognize the spaces that you're already in. Recognize the ones you're already leading in, the ones you already have influence in. God has already placed you in spaces where your leadership is needed. If you're a parent, your leadership is needed at home. If you have a job, your leadership is needed in your position. With your friends, your leadership is needed. You're leading by how you show up in those relationships. Leadership is not out of nowhere. It's not outside someplace waiting for you. It's right where you are. And if you don't lead well where you are now, you won't be ready to lead where God is taking you next. You have to stop shrinking back. Too many people downplay their influence. Too many people say they're not ready. Too many people assume someone else is better suited. Too many people assume what they bring to the table isn't enough. I know that because I've been that person. Friends, the moment you stop owning your influence is the moment you start burying it. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to have it all figured out. You just have to own the space you've been given. Here's number 2. Take initiative before you feel ready. Most people never step into leadership because they're waiting for a feeling that will never come. I'll move forward when I feel confident. We talked about this last week. I'll step up when I feel qualified. I'll take action when I feel like a leader. Confidence doesn't come before action. Last week, confidence follows action. The best leaders move before they feel ready. We can look at Peter in Matthew 14. He saw Jesus walking on the water and said, "Lord, if that's you, tell me to come to the water. Tell me to come to you on the water." Jesus didn't give him a detailed plan. He didn't say, "Here's how you're going to do it. Here's what I want you to do. Step 1." No, it wasn't that. Jesus simply said, "Come on." He said, "Come." And what did Peter do? Peter stepped out. Some of us have been waiting for a plan. God, show me how I need to do this in every step. But leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about having the courage to step. Do the next right thing in front of you. Most people get overwhelmed by the big picture of leadership. I don't know how to lead a team. I don't know how to start a business. I don't know how to step into my calling. You don't have to know the whole plan. You don't. You just have to take the next step. No, let me change that. You just have to take the first step. And then after the first step, you take the next step. And then the next step. If God is calling you to lead, show up today like a leader. If you want to influence more people, steward the relationships you already have. If you feel unqualified, start growing in the areas that you need to develop. Don't wait until you feel ready. Move now. Step number 3. I told you these were 3 quick, easy steps. Number 3, multiply what's in your hands. Multiply what's in your hands. Take what you have and multiply. Because leadership is not just about what you do for yourself. It's about what you invest in others. Leadership is truly about building others. You'll hear me say that a lot in these sessions. It's about building others. The greatest leaders aren't just focused on themselves. The greatest leaders are focused on empowering others. If you want to multiply your influence, start pouring into other people. Encourage someone today. This session, take this and pour it into somebody else's life. Teach what you've learned. Share what you've learned. Invest in someone else's growth. Because true leadership is not about what you keep. It's about what you give away. The legacy of your influence is in the people that you impact. At the end of your life, your greatest influence won't be what you've accomplished. It will be the people that you've impacted. So I want you to ask yourself, who am I building? Who are you building? Check it, not what. Who are you building? Who are you investing in? Who are you pouring into? Who will be better because of your leadership? All of these questions are specifically speaking to who. Because leadership is not about accumulation. It's about multiplication. You don't need more time, more credentials, or more permission. Friends, what you need is to start. Own your space. That's number 1, own your space. Take initiative before you feel ready. That's number 2. And multiply what's in your hands. Friends, I'm telling you, if you do those three things, your influence won't just grow, your influence will multiply. Leadership is not something that happens to you. Again, leadership is something that you step into. Next week we're going to go to another level. We're going to talk about something that holds too many leaders back. And it was only recently that I began to accept it myself. Imposter syndrome. If you've ever felt like you weren't good enough, experienced enough, or qualified enough to lead, friends, next week is for you. I want you to jump in. If that's not you, still join us next week. Imposter syndrome. We're going to overcome it. Stepping into your God-given authority. Here's what I want you to do. Subscribe and share this message. And friends, I'll see you next week for Leadership Impact Night. I pray that this was a good session for you. I pray that that you'll be able to take some of the things that you've looked at here. You'll watch this video over and over again. Jot down some notes. Take into consideration the things that we've talked about, the things that you've seen on the screen, and not just take them into consideration. Apply them to your lives. Apply them to your leadership, and I can guarantee you, you will see your influence multiply. Notice that I'm not saying grow. You'll see it multiply. If you're looking for exponential growth in your leadership and in your influence, follow the three things we've talked about tonight. I will guarantee you'll see the difference. That's it. That's all I have for tonight, friends. Again, I trust that this was good for you. I trust that you'll be here next week. Like the page, like the video, like the stream. Leave some comments for me. We are going to dive into overcoming imposter syndrome next week. I'm looking forward to that. Until then, have a blessed and wonderful night. I'm Pastor Benjamin Wilson. This is Leadership Impact Night. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Oh.